Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Wallsend history story. This week is another in the series of Tales from the Past, and this is video number 16. As always, these stories will be from various different years and not in any particular order, and they may be about people, places, or just things that happened in the past in Wallsend, and some stories may be a little longer than others. I hope you will enjoy it and find it interesting. As said in a recent couple of videos, I have done quite a few of this type of video lately, but I do still have some family issues going on that are taking up the majority of my time at the moment, so these videos are a lot easier for me to research, but I do still hope to do some more in-depth one subject videos as soon as I am able to. I am starting this week with a couple of stories about butchers, just to keep them all together. In 1866, an article appeared in the local papers discussing the Wallsend Butchering Society. It seems this society was set up by what was described at the time as the working men of Wallsend, as they were unhappy at the high prices the butchers were charging. They were hoping to set up a system somewhat similar to the Cooperative Society. They planned to take subscriptions from members, who at that point in time numbered 65, and then use this money to buy meat and rent property and sell the meat to members at lower prices. They also planned to rent a building next to the Railway Tavern, later the Railway Hotel, on Wallsend High Street. This part did make me smile though, as the owner at the time, Mr. Hutchinson, said he wanted £16 per year rent, but he would be happy to accept 8. Of course, the Butchery Society said they would be more than happy to pay £8 per year, and they hoped that their members would go and clean out the building ready for use as soon as possible. Sadly, I wasn't able to find out if their plans worked, but there does not seem to be any further evidence of it in any of the news articles, so perhaps they never managed to get and keep enough members to make it work. And I also don't think that the local butchers of Wallsend, of which there were several, would have been too happy about this society setting up in competition, so it is possible that they lowered their prices a little, so people saw no need to join up to the Butchering Society. Another butcher story comes from 1918. This time the subject was a meat shortage. It seems that they felt that Wallsend was not getting its fair share of the cattle from Newcastle. This, it seems, resulted in signs being put in shop windows informing people that they would only be allowed half of their usual supplies, and that the butcher shops would now be closed all day Monday and Wednesday, and only open on mornings on a Tuesday and Thursday, so they would only be open fully on Fridays and Saturdays. I can imagine how hard this must have been for those living in Wallsend, still struggling with rations because of the war, and now finding that meat was going to be even harder to find in the town than ever. We truly don't always realise just how lucky we are today, and I do hope that these extreme measures did not last for too long. Still sticking with the butcher subject for the moment, another story from 1954 stated that Wallsend butchers no longer did their own slaughtering. It was said that the years of rationing had brought this to an end. They stated that the decontrol of meat was due to come into effect soon, and so far only 2 butchers had applied for a private slaughterhouse licence. They believed that the 30 butchers in Wallsend, which also included those in Wilton Key, would be more likely to continue to buy their meat, as described at the time, as off the hook. I think this was probably a good idea, to be honest, as most of the old health reports of Wallsend from the years before this spoke of badly run slaughterhouses and diseases which would spread rapidly, often resulting in the slaughterhouses being closed down. But what really caught my eye about this story was the mention that prior to the start of World War I, more than 40 head of cattle and sheep a week were driven into Wallsend, obviously not in a car, and dispersed around the local butchers. I have to admit that I found it very hard to imagine cows and sheep wandering along Wallsend High Street, and I do wish that there had been a photo showing it, but sadly so far I have not found anything. Sinkholes are something we have seen in Wallsend from time to time, especially the more recent issues on the lower half of Station Road, and in the past, and not that distant past either, these seem to be quite a regular thing. I'm only going to talk about 2 occasions though. In 1954, a bus driver was heading along Wallsend High Street when he was shocked to see a hole open up in front of him at the junction of Station Road and the High Street. He said the hole was about 2 foot wide but went down around 8 foot, that's a canny deep hole really. The council were quickly on site and broke down the rest of the hole so that it could be filled in, but amazingly, traffic heading along the high street would simply be diverted around the hole. Now I have to admit that if I had been there at the time, I think I would have been driving in the opposite direction and not going near it for fear that I vanished down an even bigger hole. Another case of a sinkhole happened in 1959 in Laurel Street, and this time the road was closed, which is not really surprising seeing as the hole was 8 feet wide and 12 feet deep. It had been spotted by the police early in the morning, and the council was soon on site filling it in with large stones and rubble. And it was also quite close to an underground electric cable, but they had hoped that the supply would not need to be turned off, and so far nobody's power had been affected. The article at the time said this hole was quite close to the area where previous holes had been found, obviously Station Road, and it was felt that it often happened after very bad weather, as a strip of what they called sandy subsoil was washed away, causing the hole to appear. I do wonder how the people living in the area felt about that though, and felt about the huge hole that had appeared outside of their homes. And this story also did make me think of the reason why St. Luke's does not have a spire, as it was felt that the sandy nature of the soil in the area where it was built would not be strong enough to hold the weight of a tower and a spire. And it does sound like this was a good idea, or the whole thing might have vanished into a massive sinkhole. A strange little story appeared in the papers in 1918 when a lady by the name of Elizabeth Sims, who lived in Wallsend, was taking her husband Thomas to court for desertion. She said she was his 5th wife, but she had not known about his other wives until after she had married him. She was asked if it was true that she had once accused Thomas of having killed his previous wives, and she said, "No, I have not, but I do find it odd that they all died of the same thing." Sadly, the article never went into detail about what the previous wives died of. Anyway, Thomas said that he had simply had enough of his wife, number 5, and had no plans to go back to her, and in the end he was ordered to pay her 15 shillings a week. So I think it might have actually been cheaper to have carried on living with her. But it did make me wonder just what his other wives did die of, but I guess we will never know. In 1898, a man by the name of Robert found himself in court accused of having stolen a shoulder of bacon belonging to William Morrison of Wallsend. William said he valued the bacon at 5 and 6. He had not seen it stolen, but noticed it missing and immediately sent one of his staff for the police. It has to be said that the meat in question was not small, so it would have been impossible to escape in broad daylight without being seen. And I had a little smile to myself, imagining Robert running along the high street with a big lump of meat in his hand, thinking no one would spot him. Sergeant Johnson said a lady by the name of Elizabeth Kelsey had been in the shop at the time, and she had told him she had seen Robert take the bacon and leave without paying. So Sergeant Johnson went to his home in Carville Road, and on searching the house he found the bacon and immediately arrested Robert for the theft. When the case went to court, Robert did not seem to have any reason for stealing. He said he was a man who was in regular employment and did not really need the stolen meat. This, it seems, resulted in Robert being fined £1, which was quite a lot in 1898, around £160 in today's money. and if Robert was unable to pay this, he would have found himself sent to prison for 14 days. Another little story from Wallsend Green. This one dates from 1962. It was said that the council planned to keep this area as a quiet, pleasant part of Wallsend and did not want any more businesses or similar moving into the area, and it was for this reason that they had turned down a recent planning application. They stated that the RAF Association had wished to turn part of Dean House into their headquarters, but this had been refused on the grounds of lack of parking facilities and also from a road safety point of view, also from the reasons they had stated before that they did not want any more businesses and the likes in the area. It had been appealed, but this had also been turned down. And I have to admit that I am in agreement with the council on this one, as I don't think it would have been a good idea to have had the RAF on the green. A very strange story appeared in the local papers in 1949 about the badger of Wallsend. I have to admit that a badger connected to Wallsend is not something I ever expected to read about. It was said that the allotments off Station Road had been losing a lot of chickens, and it was thought that evidence gathered had suggested that this was not something caused by a fox or any other animal similar, because they did also mention dogs, and it was thought that other signs of a badger had been seen in the area. Sergeant Atkinson, who was based at High Farm, said he had been to investigate the area and said the allotments were close to the burn and a sewer that leads into Wallsend Park, and it was possible that the animal had made its home there. Another officer with country experience said he had been in no doubt that a badger was responsible for the deaths of the chickens. However, no signs of a burrow had been found despite extensive searching, and at that time it was still a mystery. And sadly, a mystery it will have to remain, as despite my extensive searching, I was not able to find a follow-up story about the so-called badger of Wallsend. So if anyone listening maybe remembers this story at the time or knows anything more about it, do please let me know in the comments below, because I would love to know if a badger was ever found or if they eventually found another culprit. The final story this week is about the death of Major Potts. I do hope one day to have time to do a more in-depth story about Major Potts and his connection to Wallsend. Major Potts is buried in St. Peter's Churchyard. You can see his grave in the photos on screen at the moment. And when Major Potts died, he had actually been living in Harrogate. However, he had no plans to be buried there, and Canon Henderson, who at the time was the rector of St. Peter's, had been informed that the Major would be buried in the family burial plot. I am sure many of you will have seen this grave when in the churchyard, as it is one that does stand out due to the fence round it and its location, which is quite close to the actual entrance to the church, so it is hard to miss. But sadly, some of the inscriptions on the stone are quite worn now with age. And Major Potts died in 1896, and in the write-up about his death it was stated that when St. Peter's Church had been restored a few years earlier, around 1892, Major Potts had presented the church with a beautiful window which had been placed in the eastern front. This had been in memory of his mother, father, and several of his brothers and sisters, all of whom are buried in the churchyard. Now I did exactly wonder where this window was and if it is still there today. The Potts family, it was said, were very well liked and respected in Wallsend, so as I said earlier, I do hope to do a lot more detailed story about the family in another video soon. I do hope that you have enjoyed these short little stories about the past life in Wallsend. Like I say, they are really just a glimpse into the past and a few little things that went on in the past. I keep saying the past, but it is the past. And I hope that you have also found them interesting. I do thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again very soon.